I'm going to speak to our church family about something that excites me. I hope that you'll get on board and feel as excited about the kind of church that we are and where God has taken us and where we believe He's taking us to. And so everybody gets to kind of have an inside look at a personality trait of Crosspoint that I really am proud of. Not proud in an arrogant kind of way, but proud in a feeling of accomplishing what God has called us to do and who He's called us to be. Crosspoint is a very generous church. And the thing about that is it didn't happen overnight. It took some time. It took an understanding of why and how God expects us to be generous. In other words, we had to find the model for the kind of church we are in the Scriptures. We have to be committed to it and stay focused on creating a generous culture at Crosspoint. It's not an accident. It happens intentionally. I'm going to tell you why and how we do that. And at the end of this sermon, I'll share just a few examples of how we're being a generous church, and I'll talk about how we continue to find ways to create a generous culture here. And I think most of you are going to love this sermon, so let's dive right in. Critics of the faith, they will often make fun of some of the Old Testament narratives and stories that we have embraced and believed, and some of those stories are hard to defend sometimes, even as believers who are leaning into that being the truth. God talked to Moses from a burning bush. It was not consumed. Some people have challenged that, and some Christians find it hard to defend. The Red Sea parts and the children of Israel walk across on dry ground. That's been debated and challenged. Moses strikes a rock and water comes out. Thirsty Israelites are able to drink after wandering around in the desert. Little David kills a 9-foot, 6-inch tall Goliath with one stone. Some people say it's just not a realistic story. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thrown into a fiery furnace. They walk around in it and then walk out of it without one hair on their body being singed. Daniel is thrown into a den of lions, and the angels of the Lord shut their mouths so they can do him no harm. I could go on and on and on of great stories of our faith that critics will often challenge and a lot of believers find difficult to defend. Incredible stories. Christians don't believe them. Believers sometimes struggle to defend them. But I believe the Bible is true from Genesis all the way to maps. Anybody else? It's just me. I just do. I've seen God do too much in my own life and in my own family to doubt the gospel narrative. I'm all in. I believe it. But I got to say, there's one story in the Bible that every pastor friend I know has trouble believing. It's a little bit of a stretch for us as pastors. It's hard. We have a hard time to embrace it, mainly because we've never seen anything like it. We've never experienced anything like it. We don't know anybody that's ever experienced anything like it in our lifetime. So it's a challenge. So I want to read it to you and then let you see if you can figure out what's so unbelievable about it. And it comes out of Exodus chapter 36, verses 2 through 7. The Bible says, Then Moses summoned Bezalel and Oholiab. And I'm not even close to the correct pronunciation. I don't even try on those things. I just throw it out there. And every skilled person to whom the Lord had given ability and who was willing to come and do the work. They received from Moses all the offerings the Israelites had brought to carry out the work of constructing the sanctuary. And the people continued to bring freewill offerings morning and after morning. So all the skilled workers who were doing all the work on the sanctuary left what they were doing and said to Moses, The people are bringing more than enough for doing the work the Lord has commanded to be done. And then verse 6, Then Moses gave an order. He gave an order. And they sent this word throughout the camp. No man or woman is to make anything else as an offering for the sanctuary. And so the people were restrained from bringing more, because what they already had was more than enough to do all the work. Now, because of personal experience, and this is just me, okay, but I find it easier to believe in burning bushes not being consumed and hungry lions not being able to pounce and giants being slain by little boys than to believe that there was ever a time that a leader of God's people had to stand up in front and say, Hey, please don't give any more. Just stop, cut it out. We don't need any more. We've got all we need. Here's the thing. When we study this story, we discover what happened was not accidental. It wasn't because someone won the lottery, the reason they had all that they needed, not at all. This incredible, hard-to-believe story from the Old Testament historical record was actually both intentional and spiritual. And I discovered a long time ago, if we're going to have a generous church culture here at Crosspoint, we've got to be intentional as well, and we've got to be laser-focused on the ongoing spiritual journey of generosity. So let me tell you two quick things about culture. First of all, culture happens as a result of what we create, what we intentionally create, or what we allow to happen. Culture evolves out of that. Now, you have to be intentional to have a generous culture and to create a generous culture. You don't have to do anything to create a culture of greed. Just stand back and watch. Greed happens naturally, okay? You don't have to teach your children to be stingy. They come out of the womb making demands. We know this all too well around our houses here lately. They're very self-centered. We love them, but they're all about that self-centered thing, right? You have to teach your kids to share and be generous. You don't have to teach them to be stingy. That comes natural. Number two, creating culture takes time. It takes time, especially when you're trying to create a generous culture. It doesn't happen overnight. Now, this is exciting stuff. I'm going to share with you some amazing things, and your jaw is going to be on your chest. I'm telling you, it's going to blow your mind. When we first started Crosspoint in 2004, we had no money and no budget. How do you establish a budget when you don't have any money? How do you create a generous culture when you have no resources to be generous with? Things were not going so well. We started very small, but even in the beginning, when we had very little, we began to nurture and develop a generous culture by helping people and making our ministry matter in the lives of hurting folks. Every step we took, though, as we invested in the lives of people, was a step of faith, because a lot of times we were giving away stuff that we didn't really have, that was really already designated to pay a bill or to pay rent or whatever that it might have been. We started with nothing. By the end of our first year, we had taken in about $60,000. They paid me a little piece of that, and the rest went to pay rent and church bills. It takes a lot of faith to be rich toward God when you don't have any riches. Holla back. You know what I'm saying out there. Anybody can relate? I remember the first time I ever told our church that we needed to give some money away. We were trying to buy some land. We found 46 acres of land, and we wanted to build a campus on that 46 acres. They were asking $550,000 for it. Our annual budget the year that we were trying to do this was about $120,000. And I stood up in front of about 75 adults, and we told them that we needed to, we needed God to help us buy this land, but no bank in town would talk to us. We were still way too young as a church. Nobody would talk to us about making that purchase. So I said, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give some money away. And that made no sense to anybody in the room. And they kind of looked at me, cocked your head like, I think he's finally lost it. We're going to give money away. We're trying to borrow money, so we're going to give money away. We need a blessing in order to receive a blessing. I said, let's find somebody to help. So we found a homeless shelter in town back in those days that had a soup kitchen and housed people, and we took them a check, and we blessed them, and we gave them $5,000 that we didn't have to give away. That money should have been used to pay some bills. And matter of fact, they had to pry it out of my hands. I went in there and the check was shaking, and I'm like, we want to bless you. Not really. No, not really. Yeah, we want to bless you. And it was just hard to make that gift when you knew that you were giving away money. And I want to explain to you why we're this kind of a church and why we continue to do things like this. I explained to our little church way back then what I'm about to explain to you today, and why that we've taken on this attribute as a body of believers. If you want God to pour in, you have to pour out. You just have to. So that's what we did. That was a great opportunity to walk by faith and trust God to open some doors for us. Miraculously, God made a way for us to buy 46 acres. We paid $550,000 for it and kept that land for about 2 years. We sold the land 2 years later for $1.5 million. Would you like to have a business deal like that, anybody? I negotiated with a cell tower company because I'm smart like that. Y'all just don't realize it. But we owned the land, and they wanted to put a cell tower there. That tower's still standing. Every time I drive by that tower on the Hope Mills bypass, I see $225,000. Y'all see a cell tower? I just say thank God for $225,000. Now, we went to close when we sold that land. We went to close on that land. We paid $550,000 for. We had an additional $225,000 that God blessed us with a cell tower. Barnhill Construction came and said, hey, y'all got this big hill in the middle of this 46 acres. We'd like to level that for you, and we'd like to buy your dirt. And so they bought about $120,000, $130,000 worth of dirt from us. God just took that little $5,000 that we poured out when we didn't have much, and exponentially, He just began to multiply it. And I want to show you this. Put this up. I've never in my life held $1 million check in my hand, but the day we closed on the sale of that land, I had $1 million, and I didn't have any problem grabbing it from that attorney. And I held it, and I shook it, and my hands were still shaking, but for a different reason. $1,013,462.20, and I will not. I've got this thing saved on every thumb drive I own, okay? In case I lose it on one, because it reminds me that in order for God to pour in, I have to be willing to pour out. Amen? That check right there is the reason that we came here. That's the reason that about 95% of you are a part of this church, because we poured out $5,000 when we didn't have $5,000, and God just started pouring back in. And He started pouring back in and pouring back in. You see, and this is important, and I want you to get this. Do you think that $1 million profit in 2 years made a believer out of anybody that was a part of Crosspoint Church back then? It did. They thought I was smart then. For a little while. It lasted for a little while. They're like, oh, our pastor's so smart. It took some time, but a generous culture started to evolve. Now, in the day and time in which we're living, when I get up and I say, hey, like we did a few weeks back, and we said, hey, we're going to give away $20,000 that we've taken in today. We're going to give all that away. Everybody that was with us on that $1 million thing, they start going, oh, this is going to be good. Everybody else is going, why would he do that? We're trying to build a new building. Why would he give away $20,000? Why would these guys give away that kind of money when we're trying to raise money? But people that have been a part of this thing for a while, they go, oh man, I can't wait to see what God's going to do now. Because they remember what God's done in the past, and God's already been doing some incredible things out of that $20,000 that we just gave away. That's the kind of church that we're going to be. We've been very, very intentional to teach and model generosity, and God has opened the windows of heaven, and as we pour out, He keeps pouring in. And I want everybody to experience that. During the first few years of this church, we endured a horrible financial strain. We had more money, or we had more vision than we had money. Most church plants don't survive the first 12 months, much less the first 2 years. And I didn't think we were going to survive the first 2 years either. In fact, I used to stand up. There was a season, and some of you in this room participated, but I would go, hey guys, we need some money. Summer months are real lean. People travel and they don't give to the church if they're not here, and we're going to struggle to survive. And so during the summer, we need to borrow $20,000 to get us through the summer to keep our doors open. And I'd say anybody in the church that wants to take some money out of your savings account and earn 10% for 12 months. You give us $6,000 for 12 months, we'll give you $6,600 back. That's pretty good return, okay? So I had people, the first time we did that, they go, I trust my pastor. He's a good man. And we had about $40,000 worth of dollars that they said, we want to get in on that. We want that 10% return. And I'm like, no, we only need $20,000. So y'all, the rest of you missed your chance. And then I get in the car, and Sylvia looks at me, she goes, how in the name of God are we going to pay all this money back? And I said, I don't know, but they don't know that we're going to, don't tell nobody that we don't know how we're going to pay this back. Let's just keep that between me and you, but this is on God, this ain't on me. We're trying to keep this thing open. 12 months later, all of a sudden, God had blessed us and taken us up to another level, and we were able to give everybody their 10%. We did that for several years in those early days, just trying to keep this church open and trying to keep the place functioning. We had people to leave our church. As the church began to grow and God began to pour out, they would leave our church and they'd say things like, I liked Crosspoint when it was a much smaller church of 75 or 100 people. I knew everybody. I knew everybody by name. It's too big now. I liked it when it was little. Those people are morons. It's easy to say crap like that when you have money to buy food and clothes and a place to live. We didn't have My wife and I lost a house. You've heard this story. We lost a house so that we could pay the bills that the church had to keep the doors open. When that happened, we didn't know where we were going to go, but we knew God was in this, and we were going to make whatever sacrifices we had to make. And so we had a soldier that was about to deploy. He come to us, he said, Pastor, I heard the story. I know you lost your house. You guys don't have no place to go. He said, I want you to move into my house. I'm going to be gone for a while. And we didn't have an option. I was a proud guy, and I wasn't telling everybody my business, but I said, we don't have a choice. Maybe this is a God thing. So we moved out into a house in Spring Lake, and we drove all the way back, commuted back and forth every day. And then, unfortunately, not unfortunately, but yeah, unfortunately, he calls me one day, he goes, I'm coming home. I'm like, are you really? Really? You coming back? And he said, yeah, Pastor, I'm coming home. And I love y'all, but I'm moving back in, and y'all got to move out. And I'm like, okay, we'll be gone when you get here. We'll have everything back in order. So we didn't have a choice. We had no place to go, had no money to rent a place. We were just trying to keep the church open. I was trying to stay full-time there, and Sylvia was trying to stay and hang on as long as she could before she went out and got a different kind of job. And so we moved into the church. Now, unbeknownst to the people that were going to the church at that time, they didn't know. We took some dividers, some big tall dividers that were on rollers, and we rolled them up into the corner of the sanctuary, kind of back in the back corner, and we put our mattresses on the floor and hid them with those dividers. One morning, we had a daycare back in those days. One morning, it's about 5:30 in the morning, Micah, he wakes up out of a dead sleep, and he forgets he's in the church. And he goes walking out into the lobby in his boxer shorts. And Alyssa Williams, who was sitting right over there in the first service, she walks in and she goes, Micah? And he goes, and he didn't say a word, he just turned around and went right back in the auditorium. He realized, hey, I'm not supposed to be living here, We didn't know what else to do, and that lasted for a while, And the thing is this, and I want you to understand, I remember very well how hard it is to have faith when you don't have much. Okay, I understand. Most churches begin with a story like what I just shared with you. This is why most pastors can't relate to Exodus chapter 36. The people were restrained from bringing more. We can't imagine that, because what they already had was more than enough to do all the work of God. I remember the Sunday that I called our little church together, and I told them before service started, I called a membership meeting, I said, we got 6 months left here, and we're going to have to close the doors. God's got to do something, or we're pretty much done. We'll ride this out for 6 more months. And they said, what are we going to do, Pastor? I said, we're going to give some money away. It made no sense to anybody. You're going to expedite 6 months. It's going to become 3 months. You can't do that. How can you be generous when you don't have much to be generous with? Some of you have been in the same circumstances, and you're asking yourself the same question. How do you do that when things are so tight and so hard? Pastor, I want to be generous, but I just don't have much. I've been there. I know how hard it is to give when you don't have resources in your hand. There's a great story in the Bible about King Ahab. He was an evil king. He married an evil woman named Jezebel. Anybody ever heard that name? You ever called somebody a Jezebel? Cut that out. Don't do that no more. She was bad. She was really bad. And she turned his heart away from God and toward idols. And God says to Elijah one day, he said, Ahab has taken Israel, my people, down the horrible road, and I'm going to bring judgment. I'm going to have to bring some punishment so that I can reel them back in. So he says, go to Ahab and tell him there's going to be a famine and a drought in the land until you start behaving yourself and get back on the right path. So he goes back. There's this famine. Basically what happens, there's this famine that impacts Elijah too, because he was at a brook where a raven came and brought food and fed him, and finally the brook dried up. He didn't have any more water. The raven quit coming, and he's like, God, what do you want me to do? God says, I got a little widow woman. She don't have much, but she's got a little bit in her hand, and you go tell her this. And let's pick this up, and I forgot to write it in my notes, so we're just going to read it from up here. It happened after a while that the brook dried up because there was no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and stay there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to provide for you. So he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks, and he called to her and said, Please get me a little water in a jar that I can have something to drink. Next verse. As she was going to get it, he called to her and said, Please bring me a piece of bread in your hand. But she said, as the Lord your God lives, I have no bread, only a handful of flour in the bowl and a little oil in the jar. And behold, I'm gathering a few sticks that I may go in and prepare for me and my son, that we may eat it and die. This is kind of our last meal. Then Elijah said to her, do not fear. Go do as you have said, but make me a little bread cake from it first, and bring it out to me, and afterward you may make one for yourself and for your son. For thus says the Lord God of Israel, the bowl of flour shall not be exhausted, nor shall the jar of oil be empty until the day that the Lord sends rain on the face of the earth. So she went and did according to the word of Elijah, and she and her household ate for many days. Verse 16, the bowl of flour was not exhausted, nor did the jar of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord which he spoke through Elijah. This is the Crosspoint story, people. This is what God has done for us over and over and over again. It's happened consistently. Some people, look, I'm going to talk plain. Plain talk's easily understood. Some people get real bent out of shape about returning a percentage back to God, and they forget to worship God with everything they have. They get focused on the little bit in their hand, and they forget about everything. I learned a long time ago, if Crosspoint's going to be a place that cultivates a generous culture, we have to be intentional about it, and we've got to understand the spiritual nature of generosity. We pour out so God can pour in. Bill Hybels, who has personally helped this ministry here at Crosspoint, and I love him. I know he's in a mess right now, and I've been praying for him, and I'm certainly not piling on. Bill Hybels shared the story of a close friend who owns a large corporation, and he talked about this guy loving to do strategic planning for his company. So he hires high-priced consultants to come in to help him put strategic plans together. 3-year plans, 5-year plans, 10-year plans, and this guy has been very, very successful. He's a multimillionaire many, many times over. So he gets the bright idea, this multimillionaire, he gets the bright idea of hiring a person to come in to help him strategically plan his personal life. He's like, well, it's working great for my business. I think I'm going to get me a consultant for my personal life. And I think probably he was taking that a little bit too far, but he thought it would be a great idea, and he had plenty of money to do it, so why not give it a shot? So he hires this big-name guy from New York City, according to Bill, for a ridiculous amount of money, who flew in to his home, met with he and his wife. He sets up a whiteboard, pretty much like what I've done here in this guy's living room, and then they all sat down to get started. And this guy, his wife, and the consultant are in this little environment, and this master life plan consultant says, okay, we're going to develop a master plan and map out your whole life for success, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, I don't remember their names. It's going to take some time and a lot of work, but if we work real hard on it together and we pull our resources here and make this happen, when we get to the end of our time together, you'll have a life plan all mapped out. So then he goes over to the whiteboard and he draws a box at the top of the board, okay? And then he talks about it. He steps back and he says, hey, listen, here's what you need to know. First of all, he said, I need you to tell me the ultimate priority of your life. What are you trying to accomplish? What's your ultimate goal? What are you really going after? The ability to buy an island in the Caribbean? I mean, do you want to own 10 more companies that are as prosperous as the one that you've got right now in 10 years? I mean, what's your life goal? He said, because that's what we need to write in that top box. And he says, here's what you can do. Everything, he said, because everything that we write on this board is going to flow out of that top box. Your life plan is going to be developed from there. So take a minute and huddle with your wife, and when you're ready, he said, I want you to tell me what to write in that box. You just tell me what to put in there. So the guy huddles with his wife, and they talk, and it doesn't take long at all because they kind of already have a feel for what they want. And they go, okay, we're ready. And he looks at him a little surprised. He says, awesome, what should I write in this box? So he walks over, and he's ready to write something. And the multimillionaire said, I want you to write God in that top box. Well, this threw the guy. He's like, what? Excuse me? They said God, G-O-D, God. Write God. He goes, well, I've never developed a life plan with God in the top box before. I've never done it, but I'm thinking we probably can make it work. So he wrote God in the top box. Okay? And then he has to kind of catch himself and gather himself, and he's realizing that he's got to improvise a little bit. And so the consultant says, well, I've never really done a master plan like this before by writing God in the top box, but we're going to make this happen. And he does. He developed a strategic plan for this CEO and his wife that has now become a book, and I had the name of the book wrong. I got to do some more homework to tell you that book so you can pick that up. And this guy's been working on this master life plan that this consultant gave to him for the last 15 years or so, led by and inspired by the Holy Spirit, and it's changed the whole trajectory of his life. He put God in the box first, and the rest of his life plan, everything else that they developed that day, kind of like a timeline, a life timeline, and they filled all this other stuff in, and they wrote more boxes and steps, and it just became this paradigm of priorities and all this kind of stuff. And they wrote it in and filled it out. And he's been living this master plan out for 15 years. And he has been blessed so abundantly. And he gives all the credit, he said, because on that day I put God right there. I put God first. I put him in the top box. Now, this is exactly how we have approached a generous culture at Crosspoint Church. And how we plan to continue to do so moving forward. We pour it out, and we trust God to pour it back in. We pour it out, God pours in, because we're going to keep him right there. That's important. You got to understand that. My dad was the most generous man that I have ever known in my life. He was always pouring out in someone else's life pretty much everything he had. He would pour out a little bit, and God would pour back in, and he would do it again over and over again. My dad taught me from the Bible what I'm about to teach you, a very simple principle. In every state, my dad served as a pastor during his career, whether that was Mississippi, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. He was a denominational pastor, and they'd move you around, kind of like you military folks get moved around every 3 or 4 or 5 years. That's what that denomination did to pastors. But the state superintendent that from the state he was leaving would call ahead and say, hey, if you want your state to be blessed, you need to put Harold Pounders on your state finance committee. He'll teach your board how to really be abundantly blessed by God. So just to prop this up a little bit, I want you to know that this has been proven and tried for years and years and years. My dad would sit in on board meetings, and guys would be, kind of shaking their head going, how are we going to pay for this? And we don't have the money to cover it. And my dad would throw them a curveball. He'd say, hey, let's give some money away. And they'd be like, where are you from? I mean, you need to go back to that other state. No, let's give some money away. And my dad was a bit edgy and a little forceful, and he'd explain to him, he said, God can't pour in if we're not willing to pour out. We need to give God an opportunity. We'll never outgive God, but let's try. Let's try. Let's see if God will do that. My dad moved to another state, and they'd call ahead and say, you better put him on your finance committee. You want to be blessed, you better do that. The committee members would argue about budgets and numbers and how to save and how to cut programs and cut back. My dad would say, let's find somebody to bless. Let's just overwhelm them and let's bless them, because God is never going to owe us. You're never going to outgive God. You give to God and he multiplies it and he sends it back into your life. I'll never forget the time I had car problems, and I was complaining to my dad on the phone one time. He taught me a lesson I've never forgot. I said, Daddy, my car, every time I turn around I'm having to fix something, put another alternator on, whatever it is. And my dad goes, this was my dad, right? My mom was sitting right here, okay? Good to have my mom here today. I have to be careful because I cried all the way through this in first service. I'm trying to reel that in. My dad on the phone said, Tracy, I said, Dad, my car keeps tearing up. He said, boy, you paying your tithe? I'm like, of course I'm paying my tithe. He said, tell me how you do that. And I told him, I'd been taught by the denomination kind of an IRS method of paying tithe. You can deduct all this stuff, and then once you don't put God first, you can take all your gas mileage, you can take all your rent and all this other stuff that they'd allow clergy to take all that out, and then whatever's left, then you pay tithe on that. And I told my daddy that. He said, it's no wonder that you're having car problems. You cutting corners on God, boy. You've put a lid on the jar. And God can't pour anything in because you're trying to preserve and protect the little bit you got. He said, you need to quit doing that and take the lid off and start pouring out so God can pour in. So my dad did this, and I'll run you through this real quick. We sat down, he gave me a Bible lesson. He said, let's go to Malachi chapter 1, where God starts off by saying, I am wounded. I remember thinking, you got to be kidding me. The God of the universe saying, I am wounded? Come on, there's no way. So I wanted to know what had wounded God. My dad explained it to me like this. God says, here's what's wounded me. Years ago, once or twice a year, I asked my people who call me Father to go and find the best lambs and the one that would bring the best price at the market. And instead of taking that lamb to the market and selling it for a great price, take a U-turn or left turn and go to the temple and bring that lamb in, sacrifice it in worship to me. And that's the kind of thing they did back in those days. And God says, you know what? This is what I asked them to do just a couple of times a year. But part of the reason why I wanted to do that is because it's symbolic of me giving the best that I have for you, my Son Jesus Christ, who's going to be the ultimate sin sacrifice, the Lamb of God. I just ask a couple of times a year for my people to take a lamb, but the best lamb, and offer it up back to me as a sacrifice. And God says, but guess what my people are doing? They're not doing it that way. He said, when an offering time comes around, they go out into the fields and they comb the fields, not for the best that they have. They don't even do any, mini, miny, mo and kind of leave it up to chance. He said they comb the fields for the sickliest lamb that they can find. The crippled lamb, the blind lamb, the diseased lamb. He said, and that's what they take to the temple and offer to me in a sacrifice. And God says, I can't believe it. Now, my dad's teaching me this, and my heart's about to jump out of my chest because I'm being convicted by it early on in my ministry. And I'm listening to him preach this little mini sermon about my generosity or lack thereof. And a few verses further, you know what God says? He said, I wish my people would bolt the door of the temple and stop this. Don't bring any lamb if it's not in your heart to bring the best lamb. Just don't even come. And I'm like, oh man, my dad's telling me this. And I'm like, wow, I'm doing the same thing to God that they were doing to him then. I'm trying to find a way to trim this thing down so that I don't have to do what God's asking me to do. I'm trying to cut that back and scale it back and find ways around it. Here's the deal. I was more focused on what was in my hand than who was in my heart. What I had in my jar instead of the opportunity to pour it out. So instead of pouring out so he could pour in, I was putting a lid on it and tying a rope around the bag so that nothing could get out of there. And after that life lesson with my daddy, who's the greatest man I've ever known, I know you feel that way about your daddy, and you should. But Sylvia and I sat down together, and we agreed early in our ministry that we would write God in that top box as well. And when he said, bring that to me, we're going to do our dead level best to bring it to God. We keep pouring out so he can pour in. When you try to protect what you have, when you focus on what's in your hand instead of who's in your heart, when you put a lid on what you have to try to preserve it and hold on to it, even if you only have a little bit, you will never have enough. Pour out so God can pour in. That's what we try to do here at Crosspoint Church. After my daddy taught me that, it changed my thinking on generosity. Sylvia and I put God in that top box, and I've been teaching Crosspoint to do the same since 2004. That will never change here. Somebody said, I can't believe that guy just gave away $20,000 of our money, our tithe money. We're trying to build a new church. Get used to it. That's what we do here. God speaks to us to give money away. We just give money away. We just get up and say, hey, everything you give today, we're going to give to somebody. We're going to bless somebody else. And people go, why do you do that? It makes no sense. You're trying to raise money to build a 1,000-seat auditorium. Yes, we are. Did you see that $1 million check I showed you a while ago? I'm going to keep pouring out so God can keep pouring in. He's done it over and over and over again. He's going to keep doing that. It's an incredible thing. Listen, creating a generous culture in a church like Crosspoint doesn't happen overnight. But before we close, I want to share just a few examples of why your giving matters here. There's no pressure here. I'm not asking you to do a darn thing more today than what you always do. This isn't a plea. Before you give, I want you to change your philosophy on it from giving, and kind of like, oh, I got to give my tithe. Oh, I got to do that. I need to text this. I need to get this done. Don't let me forget. Instead of that, I want you to consider it this way. What my dad taught me, you need to empty your jar so God can fill it back up again. You need to be generous. We're creating a generous culture here. You empty your jar. When you give your tithe and you text to give, or you drop it in the drop box, or you put it in a bucket today, I want you to not think of it, oh, I need to do this. This is kind of my obligation. I want you to consider the opportunity that when you empty your jar, you're giving God an opportunity to fill it back up again. You may walk through the church lobby in your boxer shorts, okay? Every now and then. It may get tight. We're in a tight summer right now. We just gave away half our budget for a whole month, over half. And there's a little squeeze going on. But we just emptied the jar of 20 grand, and I told you a few weeks ago how God has already made a way. He didn't give it to us tangibly, but He moved some things off the board that we were going to have to do that we don't have to do anymore, that cleared about $400,000 of responsibility away for this church to be able to get into this new building. That's a miracle. That's God saying, you poured out 20, I'm going to give you 20 times return on that. I'm going to pour it in. It's going to overflow. I'm going to open the windows of heaven and pour you out enough blessing. There should not be room enough to receive it. So let me walk through this real quick and show you why that we're the kind of church that we are, why we're not going to change this. And my board knows. This is one of the things we sat down and talked about when we first started with a board instead of a finance committee. When God speaks for us to do something, we're not going to vote on it. You guys can drive the budget and you can figure out how to fund things, but if God speaks to me to give money away, I'm not going to ask permission to do that. We're just going to get up and do it. Now, if that's uncomfortable for you, I think First Baptist has church at 9 and 11 as well, okay? So you go check that out. Let me show you what's happened here. This is a way that we are able to bless. The church is now somewhere around 800 people. We think that's conservative when everybody's here. We probably have closer to 1,000 people that call Crosspoint Church their home. I can't do all the counseling anymore. People get a little upset with me because they'll come, like I've had 7 or 8 people come by and say, hey, I need to stop by this week. And I'm like, you need to talk to Sylvia or Jenna because I'm like 2 weeks out. I don't do much counseling. I just don't have time to do it. So what we did, I asked the board, I said, put it in the budget so that we can partner with a professional counseling, Christian counseling organization that's credible in this community, and we can send our people to go. We negotiated prices for that. It runs us somewhere between $40 to $60 an hour, and they usually charge $80 to $100 an hour. But we send our people, after they meet with me initially, to some of the finest Christian counselors in the community that are available here that do a phenomenal job. And if they don't have the money to pay, we pay that for them. And that's most of them that need counseling. We pay the full fees for them. And they don't just go one time. They'll go 4 to 6 times, and sometimes we'll re-up them depending on what the situation and circumstances are. And we keep working with them until they get to where they need to go. But what we do is we keep paying for that over and over and over again. So in the last 18 months, just the last 18 months, we didn't go back any further than that, we have sent over 60 families in 18 months for professional Christian counseling. And marriages that have been strained are starting to find wholeness and completeness again. Blended families that have struggled to acclimate are starting to figure out how to navigate that and work it out. Addicts and alcoholics are starting to find a program that they can get into because your giving matters. What you're doing is making a difference in the lives already just through counseling of over 60 families in the last 18 months. That ought to make you feel good. It makes me feel great. Absolutely. How many of you were at Night to Shine this year? Raise your hand. Let me tell you about that. We didn't budget for that. It just come up and we said, hey, let's give this a shot. Let's try to do this. So we didn't have the budget. Tim Tebow, he didn't give us a grant for that. We just decided to tackle it, and we stood in front of the church, and let me give you the review. And as I'm talking, go real slow through these pictures. That's the whole room. There was about 500 people in this room and in this building for a building that was only supposed to allow like 380 people in the room. And, I just prayed the fire marshal away that night. We made it work, right? Almost 100 special needs children and adults were hosted right here at Crosspoint this past February. We wanted those with special needs to walk out of here knowing that they matter to God and they matter to us. We wanted them to leave, and I think we knocked it out of the park. I think it was the most phenomenal night. I cried all night long. I was a miserable sap all night long. They walked the red carpet. They came in and danced. Our people stepped up. They were buddies. We had so many amazing things that happened that night. We cheered them on as they walked the red carpet. That event cost us that we hadn't planned on spending $12,000. And I just stood up in front of the church. I said, hey, we want to do this. If y'all want to be a part of it, you can donate and help us. We want to make this happen. And then we had a few other organizations to say, hey, we'll help and we'll get involved. And all of a sudden, the next thing you know, we had pulled it off. And here's what was sad about Night to Shine. There was a negative. we had to turn some people away. We just didn't have the room. And some people got upset with us because another church that was supposed to do it dropped out at the last minute, so that sent a whole bunch more to us. And Micah's coming to me and said, Daddy, we're in trouble. We don't have room. How are we going to? I said, take all you can get, and then we got to shut it down. So that's what we did. Let me tell you another miracle. When you pour out, God pours in. Some of you that were at Night to Shine don't know this yet. This is good. You ready for this? The next Sunday, I think not that Sunday, but the next, a week after, we're doing a video, and we're showing the people the pictures and the video clips of what actually happened and how God just showed up, and so many families were blessed. And we've had more positive feedback from the families. Said nobody's ever loved on my kids like your church did. I'm so sorry. I used to never cry. I'm such a big sissy. Oh, I can't stop it. Is that what it is? The grandchildren. Somebody said that in the first service too. I'm trying to hold it back. But they said, nobody's ever done this for our kids before. Nobody's ever done this for my son, my daughter. So we're showing this video clip, kind of replaying and saying, thank you guys for all you did. And I go to the VIP room after that, one of those services that day, and a guy walks in who had come as a guest of Robert Long. He introduced himself, and I'm not going to call his name. He said, Pastor, I'm so-and-so, and I'm on the city commissioners. He said, I sit on the city commissioners. He said, I also chair the board for the Crown Auditorium. And he got my attention. I'm like, okay. He goes, I heard you turn some people away. You talked about that out there, and y'all are looking for a bigger venue. He said, I want you to have the Crown next year. We're going to make that happen. So I told Robert, I said, talk to your buddy and make sure that we're still good before I got up here and talked about it. He said, oh, he's already working on it. He knows, and we're planning for about 800 people next year so that we can have one massive event at the Crown. We just keep pouring out, and God just keeps pouring in because that's the kind of God we serve. Amen? Amen. We had summer camp for the first time last year. We had about 100 people counting our 13-member staff. 100 campers and staff invaded Camp Dixie last summer for our first annual Crosspoint Camp. We had no budget for that. It was another one of those ministry opportunities that just presented itself to us. I got up to the church and I said, hey, we need people to sponsor kids. We need people to help us pay for this camp. We're going to try to make this happen. Our board and many sponsors stepped up and said, hey, it's not in our budget, but let's pour out so God can pour in. It cost us out of pocket about $12,000 to host that, plus all the other money that we raised through tuitions and things, and we tried to keep it as low as we could. God showed up in an incredible way. 17 of those students were baptized, and the first ever Crosspoint Summer Student Camp was absolutely incredible and is going to be even bigger and better this year. Your giving matters. Your giving matters. I'm going to introduce you to our mission team here in just a few moments. They're going to come up. They're getting ready to leave early Tuesday morning. Me and Josh are taking them to the airport at 1:30 a.m., Josh. So we're excited about that. Not really, but Josh's is maybe a little more excited than me. But anyway, but they're going to go and they're going to build a house, another house. This will be the third house that we've completely paid for and furnished with appliances. And put that first picture up. Those children's crusades. After the 4 crusades that they have this year, it might be 3. We will have given away 800 children's Bibles to children in the impoverished village of La Bahia and a few surrounding villages there. But they go in, they do a program, they sing, they do a skit, and then we give a call to accept Christ, and many of these children step forward and accept Jesus Christ in their heart. And when the day is over, this is Sammy Phillips, who was with us the first year that we went, and she's passing out gift bags that have toiletry items in them, candy, and a Bible from Crosspoint Church. I just want to tell you again, your giving matters. Your giving matters. And then, as I said, we're building our third house this summer. This is what the first house that we ever built, this is the one that we tore down. This was a shack. The left side is an exterior view. The right side is an interior view of what Edward, our new friend, was living in. We tore that down, and this next slide is not the house we built for him. This is the one we built last year for another family that was living in a very similar shack like Edward was living in. This is what your $12,000 to $15,000 does for an impoverished family. It may not seem like a lot when you donate to a cause like this, but you are their miracle. You just changed their whole life, and it's an incredible thing what God is doing. And they've never seen people so generous. They're like, somebody wants to help me move out of a shack or out of a cardboard box into a place like this, and for $12,000 to $15,000, your giving matters. I want you to leave here knowing that. What you do and how you help us, it absolutely matters. This past week, I loaded up staff, and we went down to Operation Inasmuch. And we presented them with a check for $5,000. And I honestly didn't know a whole lot about what they do. A lot of you go down there and help feed the homeless. And I think, what was the guy's name? He's the deputy director there. Phenomenal man. Used to be a judge, sat on the bench, and just a great guy. And he gave us so much information. I was blown away. We talked about the lodge and the 40 beds that they have to house the homeless. They don't just put them in a bed. It's not an entitlement kind of thing. They put them through an education. They re-educate them, reacclimate them, and train them for more jobs, help them get their high school education, whatever that they need, so that they don't go back to the streets after they get off this program. They put them through a system, and they go out into the world and make a difference. And it's a phenomenal program. And we handed him that $5,000 check. It was like the whole room lit up. He said, man, this is so generous. And he showed us everything that they do, and we were blown away. I didn't expect to see all the different aspects of that ministry, and we've been partners for a couple of years, but it was my first time to walk through the place and to see what's actually going on down there, and to see what's happening right here at home. I want to tell you again, we hope to increase that giving every year. Your giving matters. You're making a difference, and God is doing some incredible things. Now, let me give you this one. This is a fact. This is not made up, hyped up numbers. Since 2011, we have given away, I had to change the number after the first service because they told me I had it wrong. We've given away over $200,000 to help the needy, the poor, the homeless, and those impacted by natural disasters throughout the world. Your giving matters. We couldn't do that if God's people didn't pour out so God could pour back in. Now, the big one for me, and I'm a pastor, you know I'm an evangelist. If you've taken CP 101, which is coming up again this month, you know these numbers, you've already heard it. I just want to, and they're growing, and we round up to the next 100, and we're over 1,600 salvations at Crosspoint since 2004, people that have made first-time professions of faith in Jesus Christ, and over 600 have been baptized and become a part of this church family. That's a big deal for a church that almost didn't make it. That's a big deal. Your giving matters. Your giving matters. Now, I'm a little over. I have a buddy who told me this story, and it made a lot of sense, and I thought, well, you know, that I can make a sermon out of that, so that's what I'm doing. He said, he used to, on his way home after work, he said there was a guy that would park on the corner at a stoplight, and he said he would pop his trunk, and he'd have flowers in his trunk into bouquets, and he said it, had a sign, $5 for a big bouquet of flowers. He said, and I thought, hey, it's right there, it's convenient, not going to take a lot of time. I'll stop and give him $5 and take my wife some flowers. He said, and I started doing that every week. He said, and then I noticed something. He said, it really bothered me. He said, I'd take her these flowers, and there was no marching band when I would hand her the flowers and say, hey, I brought you some nice flowers again today. He said she would kind of take them and toss them on the counter and just walk off and keep doing what she was doing. He said, and it kind of bothered me. I'm trying to be good to you, and you're not even acknowledging the gift that I'm giving to you. So he said that, and she said this. She says, since you asked, I'll tell you why I feel the way I do. You throw $5 at that guy. She said, I've seen his sign. I know how much you pay for these flowers. You throw $5 at some guy on the corner for flowers that are just hours away, practically $1 an hour. They last about 5 hours after you bring them home. And then they need a decent burial because they start stinking up the place. She says, come on. Take the time to drive into town, spend the money on some nice flowers. That will tell me how much you care. That'll tell me that you're willing to go out of your way and not just a quick little detour off the road and a $5 bill. She said, you can quit doing that. I'd rather you not give me anything at all than to put no effort into this whatsoever. Does that message sound like a recurring theme to you? Listen, I don't want something from you. I say it all the time. I want something for you. People of God need to quit cutting corners. We just got to quit cutting these corners toward God. Our generosity and understanding the concept of a culture of generosity, of emptying a jar so God can fill it back up, it's got to cultivate on a personal level, on a church level, on a county-wide, state level. It's got to happen. God created us to be generous people. Your giving matters to God. At some point, you have to decide what's more important. What you have in your hand, a little or a lot, or who you have in your heart. At some point, you have to make the call. And look, I've been there. I know how hard it is. I've been there when I didn't think we were going to make it. I've lost at one point everything we had, but we stayed true to what God had called us to do. You've got to do the same thing if you want God to pour in. You got to quit holding on to the little bit that you have and start trusting God. When you pour it out, all of a sudden, just like the widow, she didn't make just one meal, she made two. She thought she was going to make one and die. She poured it out, God just kept replenishing it. That is a divine principle. My daddy taught me that, and I just taught you that. You're missing it. You're missing it if you don't do it. You're absolutely missing it. Let me tell you this. We have about 700 adults who attend Crosspoint Church regularly, and this is kind of the national standard. We don't have 700 adults that are generous and rich toward God. And you understand, about 60% of our crowd are people that are brand new to faith, and they don't understand about stewardship or giving or any of that kind of stuff. We're not trying to get rich. If you think we are, come visit me at my house. Ain't nothing fancy about where I live, okay? Now, if you want to see a nice place, go right around the corner and jump in Jerome's pool, because that's nice, okay? If you hear us splash during the summer, that's me and Sylvia back there acting like we rich folk, okay? I'm just saying. I'm just picking at Jerome because he'll let me. There you go. But ain't nobody getting rich here. That's not what this is about. We're gonna keep pouring out so God can keep pouring in. We're trying to teach the world how to make a difference. And those of you that's been with us for a while, you know this ain't just one Sunday morning sermon. This is who we are, and this is who we're going to be. And if that don't work for you, 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock, First Baptist Church, you can give them a shot because we're going to continue to be generous at this church. Pastor, I don't want you to give my tithe away. Look, we're going to bless people because the principle is we pour out, God will pour in. He will do it. And then someday, this is the ultimate dream of every pastor I know. I want to stand up here in front of you and I want to be able to say, people, please stop giving. We don't need your money anymore. We've done everything God's called us to do. It's paid for. Let's do something else, but don't bring no more here. Let's go help another church get to that point. Wouldn't that be awesome? Let's go help somebody else that's struggling. Let's do it there. Let's partner with somebody else that don't understand pouring out so God can pour in. That's a generous culture, and that's the kind of church I pray for Crosspoint to be. And we're striving for that, and I believe God's going to help us to get there. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes? Father, love you. Thank you for the privilege of being the pastor of such a generous church. Lord, with about 25% of our people that lean in and make sacrifices and give a percentage, I can't help but wonder what a difference it would make if everybody would pour something out of that jar so that you can pour back in and replenish what they give. Help us to understand it, Lord, that you don't need it. You can speak it, and resources just appear if that's how you choose to operate. We need the opportunity to be a blessing. So help us to do that, Father. Help us to do it exponentially, to see it multiplied and blessed in the throne room of heaven. In Jesus' name. Let me let you off the hook. I don't want your money. If you don't usually give to Crosspoint Church, don't give today. Here's the good thing about online giving on the website, putting in the drop box. Nowadays, I think Sylvia told me about 65% of you do online giving. So nobody's embarrassed because you don't come up and put money in the bucket. That's the old traditional way, and a lot of people like to do that. But the fact of the matter is 65% of our people are giving online. So nobody here knows whether you give or not. I mean, so there's no pressure here. So if you don't traditionally give, don't give today. And pray, go home and chew on this and don't just flush it, and say, I'm not paying attention. But if you give, if you're a person that is a percentage plan giver, I want you to understand something. You're not just writing a check or texting to give or putting money in a drop box going, I got to hurry and do this. I don't want to forget. You need to understand what you're actually doing. You're pouring out so God can pour in. When you pour out, He replenishes and He pours in. And I want Him to keep pouring into this church, and I want us to keep pouring out and making a difference in the world. Amen?